Irene's work can be seen at latidosreborn.com. Jamie Dimon did not plan on becoming a collector of reborn babies. As a photographer, she was working on a project where she would make photos of herself as her mother, accurate wig and all, and she needed a realistic-looking baby as a stand-in for herself in the series. And that's when she went on eBay.
And it was there that I discovered my first reborn doll. And I didn't know it was a reborn doll at the time. I was looking, and I saw quite ordinary dolls. And then all of a sudden I see this one doll. It looked like a real child. And I was like, what is that? And I was fascinated. And I couldn't believe how expensive it was either. And I was perplexed. It was like a few $1,000s. And this was, again, in 2009, so quite some time ago. Now they're much more. They can go up to over $10,000. So it was 2009 about, and I was looking and I'm like, I need one of these, but I didn't have much to spend. And I remember I bought one that was damaged and bruised, and the language surrounding it was quite interesting. But so I bought the doll and I started using that in my I Promise to Be a Good Mother series. And then I was so obsessed, I had to buy another one. So I ended up buying 2 reborn dolls and integrated them into that body of work. And I kept on thinking about these reborn dolls. I'm like, what are these things? And there was very little information available at the time on the internet. And I was just like doing everything I possibly could to find the research. And I stumbled upon the Reborn Convention, the Down East Doll Convention, which is the first convention ever where reborners met in person in North Carolina. And I reached out to a few people. No one really got back to me. So I was like, I have to go. I'm like, this is the only way that I'm going to be able to forge some type of connection. And also, how else am I going to understand what this is? Because there was very little information available. So I said, okay, I'm going to go. I brought my whole body of work in, a portfolio, the whole I Promise to Be a Good Mother series. I didn't even bring my camera. And I brought my dolls with me, my 2 dolls, my reborn dolls. And I'll just never forget the experience because it was so awakening. And so I was so nervous, to go because I was traveling to this little town in North Carolina by myself with all of these things. I didn't know how I'd be received. And I'll never forget because there's this massive convention in this tiny little town. And to the left is the doll convention and to the right is a gun convention. And I'm not making this up. So you see all of these big men carrying these rifles walking to the right, and then all these women in pink with their dolls to the left. And it was so amazing. I mean, really fascinating.
And how did they receive you? Now, I imagine that the type of person to be going to a convention like this and participating in this reborn baby community, I imagine that they are all pretty freaking maternal and loving and nurturing. Is that about right?
Yes. Like the most remarkable, kind, silly, joyful, nurturing. That's exactly right. Although I will say there is some reluctance. I mean, especially when it comes to journalists or any outsider, because of course they need to protect their community and protect how it's perceived. And as you know, there's been a lot of fetishization and misrepresentation. So yes, there is still hesitation though. But I think in my case, because I was presenting, I was showing them my work and I was very transparent. I had no really motivation or intention. I came really out of sheer curiosity.
Which is, I bet, how a lot of them came to it too in their own way, right? I mean, how else?
Yeah, and usually through the internet first, which is also really interesting. The internet plays such a vital role in how the dolls are shared. And this is what really interests me, as a photographer. Photography is central to this form of communication, right? Because that's how, these women are all around the world. Although it started in America, it's a worldwide phenomenon. Brazil, Canada, Germany actually has quite a reborn community, Italy. So when I went to this convention, I met women from all around the world. And what's so remarkable is that they've been communicating for over 10 years through the internet, but the first time they were meeting in person. So to see that very joyous kind of coming together and the enthusiasm was really beautiful for me. And I was like, how am I going to take on a subject like this? Because I'm not a documentary photographer, but it's like I knew that this was just such a remarkable subject and aligned so much with what my interests were as an artist dealing with family and fantasy and reality and fiction. And there's so many interesting slippages between all of that, and technology and AI. And I'm like, I have to figure out how I can make work about this. So
it was juicy.
Very much so. And also I really started to, I was just fascinated. It was just curiosity. And I decided, I built these really beautiful friendships that I continued. And then I really started to travel around America, mainly the Northeast, which is where I'm from, and meet these women and individually understand for them, because everyone has a completely different set of motivations and behaviors and relationships to the dolls. And they really vary from person to person. Of course, there's, some archetypes that you can talk about. But I met women who were 14 who collected, women who were of childbearing age who chose to have a doll instead of a child for financial reasons or because they can't have children. But I'd say the majority of the women are empty nesters, women who their children have left their home and now they feel this lack of purpose in some way. And the doll very much kind of fulfills that for them and reunites them with that time in their lives where they felt most, not desired necessarily, but they felt like their role was, that this was their role. This is their purpose here. And it's also about arrested development in the most beautiful way, and the playfulness of I still play with dolls. And anyway, there's so many stories I could tell you, but that was my entry. And then from there, it was really a 6-year body of work that I developed.
Because you spent so much time not only learning about this community, but becoming a part of it, documenting it, showing it in the beautiful ways that you show it. I wonder what you hope people get out of this episode of Audacious, but our conversation. What do you hope, people have to understand that maybe before they heard your voice, they didn't quite understand?
Well, I think it's not only about this episode, but it's about this type of work in general. Don't be so quick to just react. And I think with this community, there's so many dimensions and there's so many layers. Even if you might have that visceral reaction or it makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. And I think it's, it enters a bigger conversation about the uncanny valley. I think it's symptomatic of something bigger than just this subculture. And I think it's a complicated, but I would say we all just need to be a little more generous and less critical of each other.
When we first started producing the show, I think we thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. Therapy babies, let's see what we can learn about that. And I am wrapping my head around the fact that it is so much more multifaceted than that. And we could probably do a whole 3-show series on this whole community. So thank you for continuing to broaden this topic. That being said, dare I ask, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you want to make sure you bring up?
One other thing actually is, I don't know if you're familiar with the portrait babies and women who have lost children often, and I've gotten a lot of requests. I haven't agreed to do it, but a lot of women who have lost children will then kind of create a surrogate or a portrait baby of a child. And I think for grieving purposes, there is that.
They would maybe submit a photograph of the child who died, and that the doll would be made to look pretty much identical to their baby who died.
And I've gotten a lot of requests for that. So that's a whole other layer, to this culture.
That makes my hair stand up.
Yeah. But you know what? I think it's very helpful, and it's, I think it's a tool, it's a tool for grief. And I think it's really helped women, transition or move forward in some way. And so it's interesting to think about the potential, and the power that objects have.
It makes me think of, did you ever see Black Mirror?
Oh yes, I've seen every episode.
Oh,
I know.
I love Black Mirror. So the episode I'm thinking of is the one where the woman's husband or boyfriend dies, and they send her a version of him.
The best version, because it's all the best pictures that she kept of him.
Yeah, and that makes me think about that. And it seems like that show should be Black Mirror. Seemed like a good idea at the time. and how it's just like, oh, it would be cool as if you could just replicate the person who died that you love. And it seems like a good idea, but it is not without its complications. And this is me saying this, first of all, as someone who hasn't lost a baby, let alone had the opportunity to experience some sort of remake of it. But it does when we talk about the uncanny valley and that sort of feeling of there's something I can't quite put my finger on here, but it's got my spidey senses up. I don't know, it makes me think of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think about it in terms of also photography and its relation to memory, as this way to preserve or to immortalize either a moment or a loved one. And that was always my interest in some way, or at least in the beginning. It's like these dolls are more than the photograph. They are a three-dimensional physical replica in some cases. But it's like it takes it beyond what photographs can do in terms of kind of holding on to something. But that episode of Black Mirror always resonated with me because it's what we want to remember, right? Like the fact that she holds on to the pictures that are the best moments, the happiest memories, and the best representations of her husband, because he's much better looking in his replica than he was in real life, and that's interesting too, because sometimes we only want to remember the good moments, right? Not the bad ones. So it's like we construct then our own memories.
And aren't we all just a construction of our memories, which aren't ever really wholly accurate anyway?
Exactly. It's all mediated, right?
I've been developing lately a strong sense. I'm in the middle of a divorce, and I've been thinking a lot. I've been having a lot of issues. I've been having a lot of anger towards stories.
Yeah.
And how I think I've been not using them in a way that's productive. And if I'm just a collection of stories, then maybe I could put some on a shelf, or maybe I can make one mean something slightly different than how I was telling it to myself before. But yeah, if we're all just stories, then run with it, because being a human being on planet Earth is hard.
Yeah, and there's multiple narrators, right? The stories are told by many people.
Yeah, when people say stuff like, when they write about this in the history books, I'm like, what history book?
Right.
Who's they? Oh, there is none.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
So let's unpack it.
Yeah.
Jamie Dimon, thank you so much for talking with me.
My pleasure.